Hello everybody, I'm Mr. ZINZZZIN. Today I tell you the most thrilling and horror-esque stories. Please subscribe, share and enjoy. I asked my grandpa once if he's seen a ghost before. He let me sit on the couch and told me this story. He said when I was in high school we had a famous ghost story about a girl who roams our school library when she catches you alone. She would start appearing as a student and you would hear her footsteps knocking the tile floor as she walks and even the sound of books bumping the wood as she shelves them. She's beautiful, said in the story, and when you see her face something good happens to you, but it's not that easy to catch a gaze of her. One evening I overslept in the second floor of the library. That was around 6:30 p.m. as I remember, and the school completely closes on 8 p.m. To my surprise I was locked inside when I went down the library's first floor. When I woke up, I banged the door, went looking out the window shouting for help but no one responded, and I could have jumped if I wasn't on the fourth floor. Later an hour it was growing dark. I heard footsteps closing towards me, and then books hitting a certain shelf. I was sitting on the floor leaning on the first shelf close to the window when I saw strands of black hair that flung 5 meters in the air, a back of a female student wearing the school uniform and the tip of her skirt that waved fading in the side of the shelf as if she made a quick turn when she saw me. I shouted wait, then I heard her footsteps going away fast. I saw her shoulders quickly went past the gap of the books from the opposite side of the shelf where I stood. I chased her running parallel to her pace, and when I thought I'd see her as we reached the end of the shelf she's there going in between the next shelves as if she skipped space. I ignored her weirdness and checked the door assuming she got in and opened it, yet it was still locked. I turned around and saw her again entering between the 6th and 5th shelf. Hey wait, stop. Are you stuck in here too? I asked in a loud voice as I chased her again. I wasn't sure where to look because sometimes her footsteps would sound closer or farther away or as if she's just right behind me. In a second it silenced. Thinking she might be hiding somewhere I scanned the gaps of books in the shelves trying to see if she's there behind them. Searching the next shelf I accidentally bumped a book causing it to fall on my foot. When I tried to reach for it sudden pale hands quickly picked it up stocking it back on the shelf. I stepped back shocked to see it was Helen, the girl I was developing a crush on who sits beside me in class. I was dumbfounded and we stared at each other for a minute. She smiled at me. Chills traced my body. In my mind something tells me this girl is not the real her. This one's quiet and lifeless. I was about to ask how she got here when my eyes were drawn towards sound of the opening door. When I looked back at her she disappeared. I was frightened and creep high to the skin. I headed towards the door where there I saw a blonde girl wearing glasses and pulling a cart of books. It was your grandma Carrie Alon, 50 years younger, doing her job as an assistant librarian. It was love at first sight and God knows how happy I was to see her, for I was certain I'm already facing a real person. She was startled to see me and asked me a couple of questions while keeping her distance. She even threatened to report me accusing me of trespassing, but I calmed her telling her it was unintentional. As we spoke my eyes caught a glimpse of the ghost Helen up the second floor going behind the closest shelf. Carrie Ellen got angry asking if I was listening. I followed ghost Helen with my gaze until she went out the opposite end, but it wasn't Helen anymore, it was already a ghost Carrie Ellen walking towards the following shelf where she vanished completely. I stare back at the real Carrie Ellen who's clueless of what I saw. She had an eyebrow raised and she ran through the hallways calling out the security guard. So why would the ghost imitate Helen or Grandma? He explained, nobody died in the library. What I know was because majority of the students believed a ghost exists in the library she came to existence. Saying she's beautiful was an incomplete reference, so when she showed up she copied the person whom I saw beautiful. When I got the crush for Carrie Ellen erasing my thought of Helen, then she copied Carrie Ellen. This happened 3 years ago during the later months of 2012. During this time I decided to rent my own house somewhere within the vicinity of Up Village where my work is just 20 to 30 minutes jeepney ride away. I decided so to save time and money. During my first month I was doing well, leading my own life since it was my first time to live away from my family. You know the comfort of living with your parents where everything is prepared, the breakfast, dinner and etc. before you leave to work and going home. I kind of enjoying it well being alone where I get to buy my food from Carinderia where there are many dishes to choose from. Let's get to that spooky part. It was that night where I just finished my dinner. It was around 9 p.m. I was at the kitchen in front of the sink, and above the sink was a big window with metal grills and screens. It was dark on other side since it's a canal behind it. I was brushing my teeth when suddenly I saw just outside my window a white thing floating quickly passed by. I did not get a clear detail of its form since it was so quick. I got a little bit scared because I thought it was a white lady but quite small. I was a little bit shaky when I tried to challenge the thing for a fight. I shouted a little bit telling it to show up again and I will punch it hard. I just finished my brushing, then I sat down for a while trying to shake it off my head and forget about it. I got over that night with a nice piece of sleep. Days have passed without anything unusual. Until that one night. I finished all my night routines and retired to bed. I slowly wake up from a bright light in front of me. My sight was still blurry until I finally get the right focus, like a camera of our phone adjusting the focus. I just saw what it seems like a little doll wearing a white dress holding a wand, and it has a butterfly-like wings. It was small, 8 inches in length. It was blonde and the face was not clear to see. It was floating right in front of my face. Like 3 feet away. I can't move nor say a word. But I did all I can to be able to move my body. It disappeared the moment I gained movement. Then I sat for a while to think about and ignore. I was still sleepy. I need to go back to sleep. I decided to lie on my side. Just as I was closing my eyes, my body froze again. Then I tell myself, here we go again. Then just what I am expecting, a little boy carrying a balloon appeared in front of me, walking back and forth at the side of my bed. I was scared, but I let it do his stuff while I was trying to gain movement. As usual, the moment I am able to move it vanishes. Man, I sat down for a while again, looked at watch, it was 3 a.m. I still have 3 hours of sleep. I tend to ignore all these things and not let it affect my thinking and my life. So I was able to get a good sleep until morning. I have had a couple of nightmares during my stay in that place, but not as worst as the above told, until I decided to go back home and search a new job. I still have more stories to tell since I also worked in Oman. This was a few months ago. It was a late night and me, my mom, and one of my sisters were all sitting in the living room. We were just gossiping and rambling about things here and there. We have 2 ceiling fans, one in the living room and the other one was in the dining room, and they were both on. After a while the conversation started to get a little dull. It was silent until my mom spoke up and said, "What's wrong with the fan? Why is it going so slow?" At that exact moment the fan began moving extremely quick. We all looked at each other and sort of giggled. It was an odd coincidence. Later that night I went to bed. I was falling asleep until I randomly woke up. I was really thirsty, so I got up and went to the kitchen to get water. While walking to the kitchen I felt as if I was being watched, but everyone was in bed. I walked over to switch off the lights, and right when the room went dark, I heard someone whisper, "Hey." I turned around quickly, startled, but I thought it was my sister until I turned around and saw no one there. I slowly opened the door to her room and I saw her laying in bed. I ignored it even though it creeped me out. I went into my room and for some reason I left the door open. I crawled into my bed, and at this point I wasn't tired anymore. Hours passed and I couldn't fall asleep. The whole night I felt like I was being watched. I got 2 hours of sleep that night. But I woke up panting because I had just woke up from a nightmare. The nightmare was about some odd-looking person with the biggest smile who kept following me around my house, and he was everywhere I went, and every time I would see him he would whisper, "Hey." It sounded just like the voice I heard. To this day I don't get up at night for any reason. To this day I sleep with the door closed. Many say that a third eye is usually active during childhood years. It may close once the child reaches the adolescent stage, but sometimes it remains open forever. Mine was probably open when I was a kid and closed when I became an adult. Or is it still the other way around? I don't see the extraordinary right in front of my eyes but only in my peripheral vision. And sometimes I would see them only in a few seconds and they'd disappear. But what's freaking me out until now that I'm married is my ability to hear and feel that entities are just around the corner. My story happened in between late 1980s and early 1990s. I was in grade school then. We transferred to our new house in the year 1986. The lot was quite wide. Our house back then was a simple bungalow style and our fence and gate were made of wood. My mom is a believer of the supernatural because she grew up in a town located south of Iloilo City and I have no idea that I would experience such too. It was Saturday. My parents were at work and me and my brother were left at home with the house help. I was playing ball at the living room, facing the window where I can directly see the gate of the house. I focused on the ball as I was dribbling it when my eyes turned directly to the gate. I then happened to see a lady, short-haired, wearing a plain white blouse and floral skirt. She was heading out of the gate. I shouted, "Tita! Auntie," and I to run out to chase her. Our helper was able to grab my arm and said, "Stop shouting. You might disturb our neighbors." But I insisted that I saw my aunt. She is, by the way, the youngest sister of my mom, who took care of me when I was a baby. She is my closest aunt. Our helper went out just a minute after I shouted and saw that the gate was opened and went out to the street to check if my aunt was indeed there. Usually, it would take 5–10 minutes to arrive at the village gate from our house if you are to walk. No sign of the lady. Our helper saw our neighbor outside, mowing the lawn and asked how long she has been there and asked if she was able to see a lady along the way. The neighbor said she was mowing for almost 30 minutes and no one has ever walked the street. Freaked out, our helper went back to the house and asked me if I saw the face of the lady. I said no, it was just the back portion. Our helper was puzzled. She said it can't be an intruder because none of the things were taken nor an attempt to enter the house. I just stared at her, blankly. That night, the incident was reported to my parents. Mom asked me who I saw. I answered, "Tita Tata, Aunt Tata." Mom said, "It can't be my aunt because she lives in the south and Mom was not notified that she will be coming over to visit." But still I insisted. Mom and Dad just looked at each other like they know something. The year was 1980 and I was 14 years old. My parents and two younger sisters were living in Saudi Arabia where my father was stationed as part of a phone system upgrade project for the kingdom. The school for expatriates, Americans, British, Canadians and others from all over the world, only went up to grade 9 in Saudi Arabia and so for the grade 10 school year I was sent back to Canada, to live with my grandmother in a small Ontario town, not far from Ottawa. My grandmother lived alone, my grandfather having died long before I was born. She was very religious and very involved with her church community along with her regular Sunday attendance. My family didn't practice any religion and never went to church so it took some getting used to on my part being away from my family for the first time, living in a small rural town and living in a religious household. Further complicating things, I inadvertently crossed the school bully early on in the school year and found myself a pariah at the local high school where I was the new kid. To be succinct, I had a hard time adjusting to this environment and as a result I stopped going to school. This upset my grandmother deeply and she sent me to see a doctor who prescribed some kind of antidepressant. I just threw the entire bottle out the window. Drugging me was not the solution. I would take my bike and go to the library or find a park on a nice fall day and read books. At night I would stay up and watch late-night TV like The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. The apartment was on the second floor of a house by the railroad tracks on the north edge of town. It was old and musty and the floorboards and steps up creaked. There was only one entrance to the place and if anyone came in I would be able to see them coming up the stairs and pass by the living room where I watched TV. One night in November I heard my grandmother sobbing from her room which was down the hall. I knew I was the cause of her distress because I had stopped going to school and she didn't know how to deal with me. Then I heard her talking. At first I thought she was talking to herself, as this was 1980 and there were no cell phones and she did not have a phone in her room. The only phone was in the hall and she wasn't in the hall. Then a man's voice responded to her, "Don't worry, Anna," he said. Chills ran up my spine and I froze in my chair. The voice was deep and clear and in the house, and yet I had been in the living room all evening and no one had come into the house. I heard her sobbing some more, and one more time the voice spoke, "Everything will be alright." I remained in that chair until dawn. I'll never know if that was my imagination, my grandmother speaking in a different voice to herself, or perhaps, as I imagined at the time, it was the voice of my grandfather's spirit comforting my grandmother. Whatever the case, I have never forgotten that moment nor the feeling of creepy dread that crawled up my spine as something from the other world seemed to pass into this one for the moment. There is a spirit who visits me, mostly during the nighttime hours, but the presence is being felt during the daytime hours now as well. I was frightened by the visits at first, more so it was my own fear, that of the unknown on my part. When the spirit is near I can feel a tingling sensation. It starts at the toes and proceeds upward. It's the same feeling you get when you've slept on your limbs and they are slowly waking, only without the sharpness of pain that goes along with it. Fearing for my health, a trip to doctor ruled out any health fears I had of it being some underlying condition that I might have had. He probably thought I was nuts, however I didn't share my visitor with him, as a trip to psych ward wasn't on my to-do list. I remember when first moving in, last year, I was excited to show my parents around. Once we passed the threshold, there was the loudest bang. It rang through the emptiness of my newly gotten home. My father quickly went room to room expecting to find an intruder, but found no one and nothing that could have made such a heavy sound. Once the light remodeling was finished, I was able to enjoy my first few nights in my new home. Excited is an understatement, but then, one night not long after my move-in, the visitors started with nightly visits. I remember one night laying down, still very much awake with my eyes closed. Covering me was a thin sheet. I felt a hand clench the top of my thigh. My eyes shot open, my heart raced as I lay there frozen. I never saw anyone. I'm not sure I could have been okay with seeing anything at the time, but it's been months since and I'm much more curious about my newfound visitor. I say visitor because I don't believe the spirit is here all the time, but I guess it's possible the spirit is, just not announcing its stay. And looking up the home's history, there has never been a death that has taken place here. There were, however, some dabblers I believe who lived here previously. We painted over a star drawn in red on one of the bedroom ceiling. I'm assuming something to do with some witchcraft dabblers. It was a star in the middle, encased in a circle. Just recently while in bed I felt someone sit down beside me, a little unnerving when you can't see the presence that is clearly sitting next to you, only an indentation on the bed. I'll be watching TV and feel my hair being touched. Last night my bathroom door slammed. I tried debunking, telling myself there was a draft although there clearly wasn't. I do not believe this spirit is evil, however I am not certain that the entity doesn't have ill intent. I just assume the entity is lonely, maybe a bit lost or completely bored. We all get a little lonely at times, right? Maybe a little of all of the above? I was recommended to try meditation as a means to communicate. I thought of meditation only as means to relax ignorance on my part, and only after sharing my experiences with a friend did he tell me about meditation as a means for communication with spirit. I'm not sure how to meditate, but there went nothing. I have more questions now than I ever wanted to know the answers to before. I also haven't physically spoke out to him, her. Should I? How would I even address him, her? How would they even reply? Should I even address the spirit? I know there is a lot to the spirit world left to be discovered. I'm not asking for the whole 9, just a few inches. Advice, opinions and/or personal experiences are all welcome. Just trying to gain knowledge before diving in, and yet I'm already swimming in the pool. Thank you kindly, Jen. This is a peculiar series of events that involve a man who simply walks home. I'm not sure this person is a ghost and don't really know what to think, actually. When I was 10 we moved to a house where I first encountered the dancer. We moved there in late 1991 and Mom moved out in 2007. During that entire time this guy walked past our house. Nothing unusual in that. We saw him maybe once a week, a few times a week, once a month. Depended on if you were looking out the window at the right time. From this we can deduce he kept a routine. We always saw him in the afternoon, early evening. I never took notes of the times, but between roughly 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. He always wore a black or maybe it was charcoal suit, white shirt, carried a briefcase, and I think he wore glasses. He was kind of short, maybe 5 feet 4 inches or something. His hair was sandy blonde and thick. Also, he had a very brisk walk. He was quick and his pace never seemed to alter. His consistent walking pace was the most distinguishing thing about him. The first off thing I noticed about the guy was on a hot summer day, in about 1996, I was around 15. It was early evening, I was mucking around with the budgie, saw him walk past, thought nothing of it. Moments passed, I realized how hot it was and how he was wearing a full suit. Thought he was pretty dumb not to have taken his jacket off at least and wondered how someone could keep a quick pace in the heat. We'd seen him walk in different locations around town, around his usual time. Always on the same route. His route came from the station. The reason we noticed this is because our house was nowhere near the station and there were bus routes to take you to our neighborhood. No need to walk all that way. We figured he'd chosen to walk for the exercise. So when he walked past wearing a full suit on a 1,000,000-degree day, I was somewhat shocked. I can't remember what was going on, but late one night, in about 1999, Mom and I were standing on the street a few doors up from our house looking up at the stars. Mom's big on astronomy and often called me outside to check something out. However, we usually stargazed from the backyard or the driveway. Standing on the street was rare. So there we were at about 11 p.m., and there he was walking home late. From where we were standing we saw him turn down a street off ours. Mom commented that after all these years she never knew where he walked beyond the point of our place. She also voiced concern about him walking from the station so late because yahoos hung around that station after dark. I thought about how we'd never seen him in any other context all these years. Apart from it being late, nothing seemed that strange. We continued to see him walk past our house at his usual time after this. About a year later I was at the letterbox when he rounded our corner. This was the first and only time I saw him up close. Our letterbox was about 5 steps from the corner. I looked up and said hi, or something, as he passed. He replied hi or something and glanced at me briefly. There was something bizarre about this moment. I couldn't put my finger on it, and still can't. However, I was distracted by a fashion catalog, or some such nonsense, and didn't give heed to any undercurrent. As he passed I turned to go up the driveway, so I was directly behind him on the footpath. I looked up from the catalog to where I was going and he was gone. He should have been directly in front of me, because only a second had passed. I thought, where did he go? These thoughts turned to, where does he go? Our embankment was dense and steep, he couldn't have gone in there. Our neighbor's embankment was equally steep. The houses across the road had visible front yards. I don't know where someone could have hidden within seconds. Today I still don't know what to make of that. Of all the brushes with odd I've had, this ghost has always been hard to accept as a ghost. I don't know why that is, but I still feel the same today. Also of note, when he suddenly wasn't there, I didn't freak out or anything. Just looked around and thought, cool, wonder if anyone else just saw that, meaning other neighbors. Since that day we continued to see him pass our house, as well as in various points around the route from the station to our neck of the woods. He always walked briskly, always wore the same attire. As the years went on I became aware his fashion never changed and he never aged. But that doesn't prove he's a ghost either. Oddly enough, I remember the first time I saw him quite vividly. It wasn't long after we'd moved in, way back in 1991. Stopped whatever I was doing when I noticed some guy walk past our place, then continued to watch this person walk up the road. It was all pretty dull. Nevertheless, I remember that mundane moment quite well. Ever since that first time I had these questions like, what is he doing? I guess this feeling is directly linked to the weirdness in the letterbox moment. Since the letterbox day prompted me to question if he was a ghost, more questions beckoned. What motive and why bother? Was he residual and I imagined he acknowledged me because I was distracted? If he was residual, surely he would have stopped traffic. There were main intersections on his route. Come to think of it, I never saw him cross any road. In fact, he always crossed the road at a certain point in front of our house, which was obscured by trees. We had a thick mini forest of lily-pillies up an embankment from the footpath. He must have crossed around this section of path, because every time he passed our place he would be on the other side of the road by the time he passed our embankment and become visible, further up the road, from our windows once more. A few years before the letterbox moment I saw him walk through the station car park, away from the station. But that's the closest I ever saw him to the station. On that day a group of us, all teenagers, were hanging around outside the Masonic Lodge opposite the station. We were peering through the gates, making up conspiracy theories about what went on inside, any excuse to talk about paranormal stuff, the typical crap. Amusingly, peering through the gates meant facing away from the station. In hindsight this moment has pantomime qualities. He's behind you. His attire and early evening commute simply lead us to assume he was walking home from the station. So noticing him walk through the car park in the direction of the rest of his route seemed normal. Also, I never saw him at any location before the station on his route. That doesn't really mean anything either, does it? Oh well. Thanks for reading. This series of events took place between myself, my uncle and one of my best friends while we were in high school. I want it to be known that my uncle is only 2 years older than me and lived with me at the time. My uncle and my friend were dating at the time of these events. I was only present for one of the happenings. The entity is called a skilly. As I understand it, this thing is the product of Cherokee black magic of sorts. A person can send out part of themselves in a shadow-like form to harass or harm someone who they have an issue with, while they are physically in another location. As I said, my Uncle A and friend B were dating. They were out at the city lake one evening with some of my uncle's friends, just walking around holding hands. There is a tree-lined walking trail around this lake, and as they walked, I told B not to turn around and to keep walking. This really scared B and she kept asking why he said that, and I just continued to tell her not to turn around in a low tone. According to A, this entity was following them in the darkness. Later on that night, my uncle was getting dropped off at home, and as they pulled up, everyone in the car saw a human, Sasquatch-shaped figure in the field outside the home. It had continued to follow their crew all the way to our home. My uncle got out of the car as his friends and girlfriend screamed. He began to throw rocks at the entity and it began to run across the field. When they could no longer see it, his friends and girlfriend left and he went inside. A few days later, A and I were sitting in the living room watching TV in the evening. I hadn't noticed anything until my uncle pulled out his pocket knife and began to breathe heavily. I looked at him, and at that moment I could feel the change in atmosphere. I could tell that we were being watched. I asked A if it was here. He shook his head slowly, indicating that it was indeed near us. I looked around calmly and noticed a soft gold glowing figure right outside the kitchen window across from where we sat. I decided to just go to bed cause it felt weird in there. When I laid down I had the door open and hall light on. Something filled the doorway to my room in shadow. I froze in my bed. I began to quietly pray and demand that all evil leave my home. Just before it left my doorway, it let out a deep guttural growl and then disappeared. My uncle later told me that this thing had been following him for weeks. It eventually went away, but he never told me what he did to get rid of it. This is my first ever experience with evil spirits. Fortunately or unfortunately, I experienced something which is beyond our reach. Basically, I'm from Bangalore. And this incident happened to me on Jan 2016 in Karnataka, India. One of my cousin owns an estate in Shimoga, Karnataka. The estate is located adjacent to the backwaters. I plan to visit their estate, which I do very often. But I never had any hint about what I'm going to experience this time. Ghost in the backwater? I have a best companion of my life which is a German Shepherd, named Kanna, and my habit is to take my GS with me wherever I go. So myself and my GS drove to the estate and reached by noon around 3 o'clock. The day passed and at night we all had dinner together. After dinner, I took my GS for a walk near the backwater region around 10 o'clock. All of a sudden my GS started barking in a very strange voice, which I never heard before, by looking at one particular direction which amazed me. Then he started pulling me forcibly. I didn't understand what he was going through. Later, all of a sudden I sensed some weird things happening and I felt someone is running and coming towards me from the back side, the direction in which Kanna was looking at and barking. Then I clearly felt someone pushing me hard on my back and I fell down and it pained like oh hell. After this Kanna became very aggressive and looked like he was chasing away something with its shout. He started pulling me even harder and we ran from there and reached the estate. I told all that happened there to my cousin and even they were shocked to hear this incident. Then my back was paining due to that hard push. Later when checked, I had a red mark on my back and the pain was there for a few more weeks. Somehow we both managed to come out of that space. Thanks to my Kanna. Does the dogs really see or feel the spirits? In my case, this is damn true. Sorry for the lengthy story. I was excited while narrating this story as it's my first paranormal experience and on top of everything, I'm moved by the exceptional love and loyalty of my German Shepherd. He saved me. I am 17-year-old guy from Maratha, India and like to know and explore about the supernatural elements, since they have chased me since my childhood. This incident happened to me about 7 years ago but still give me goosebumps. I was at my maternal grandfather's house for the summer holidays. Me and my cousins were playing in the courtyard when one of my cousins said if any one of us had ever faced a ghost. We said no. She asked if we wanted to face one. We said yes and felt it would be a thrilling experience to face the thing we talked and were scared and fascinated of. Then she took us to a room in the back of the house and told us to light a candle and place in the middle of the room. Then she asked us to place a coin in front of the candle and then just fold our hands, concentrate and wait. We all did the same half believing that something would happen. It was just like a funny thing for us, summoning ghosts. We closed our eyes and waited for some time when something started pushing me. I thought it was just my cousin trying to scare me but when I opened my eyes it was black and bluish hand covered with scales like that of a fish pushing me and in front of me was this person with a tilted face, horrible yellow eyes looking at me. I screamed and rushed out of the room straight to my mother. I told her about my experience and she told to have faith in God and that it was just my imagination. So that was the end to the matter and nothing happened until the 4th day. I was sleeping in my room when the hand pump in the courtyard started all by itself. I went out to check and there was the same person I had seen 3 days ago. It was pumping the water out and at the same time looking at me with those scary yellow eyes and a horrible smile on its face. I screamed and just fainted on the spot and for next few days was bedridden with high fever. It was then my grandmother came to know about my incident and she had taken me to the temple for some blessings and after that I was well but not for long. After that incident weird things had started happening to me. I would see figures around me, feel if someone was constantly watching me, calling me by name, waiting for me to be left alone and then harm me. I started having nightmares and one thing I still remember is that in those nightmares that I would see or feel those things which I hated the most. Sometimes I was being tickled and sometimes I am being thrown in a pool of water. I was kind of hydrophobic at the time, and things like that and the villain was the same person I had seen before. One night it had got even more worse. I was going through one of these nightmares and woke up suddenly sweating and nervous. Next thing I saw was unbelievable. The same black and blue hand was crawling over my mother towards me. Yes, I remember this scene very clearly. But this time I could see none standing there. I went crazy and kept howling and shouting the whole night with my father trying calm me down. Next day my mother gave me a Lord Hanuman's locket to wear and told me never to mention these things to anyone as doing so may get the evil spirit returned back. After that all went well. Still remembering those things, one thing that always puzzles me is how could one actually summon the ghost with a candle and a coin, and why it was me instead of my other cousins who suffered all those things? Another thing that puzzles me is how did that spirit came to know about the things I disliked? Please share your thoughts on the questions mentioned above. Thank you for reading. In the 1970s, my urban middle-class French-Canadian parents decided to buy an old farmhouse in a remote rural area of Quebec, about an hour from Victoriaville, where I was born. We lived there until I was 6 years old, until my parents split up and we moved to Montreal. I don't remember this, but my mother says that as soon as I could speak, I told her about the voices I heard in my bedroom where I played alone. She says I would run down the stairs on a regular basis and ask her what certain words meant. She says the words were often archaic sacrilegious words and that it happened when we were alone in the house. After we moved back to the city, my father kept the house as a weekend and summer retreat, and so I continued spending a considerable amount of time there, but I never personally experienced anything later on. However, my father's second wife's sister and her husband borrowed the house for a weekend when they were having marital issues. They were reported hearing someone climb the stairs slowly and clearly in the silence of the night. They both woke up and heard it, and, since the master bedroom door is situated right where the stairs end, they armed themselves of bedside lamps, ready to attack the intruder as it reached the top, but the steps stopped suddenly as it did. They never divorced but refused to return to the house. I now have two daughters who are 10 and 13 years old. Their father grew up in an old farmhouse in Ontario, about 70 kilometers east of Toronto. When I met him 20 years ago, the farmhouse was already used as a summer house because his parents lived in Florida. We also usually celebrated Christmas there because it is very large. The house has a lot of character, with high ceilings, 2 flights of stairs, windows everywhere and a beautiful fireplace. I was told the house was built in 1837, with an extension built in 1910. When my eldest daughter was 2.5 years old, we went there to celebrate Christmas, although we lived in Toronto. The house was packed with family members, so our small daughter slept with us in her father's old bedroom. It is in the old part of the house where the rooms are spacious and the ceilings are high. There are 2 large windows in there, and it could have been used as a master bedroom in the past, although there is another room just as large as this one across the hall used by his parents. The day before Christmas, my daughter woke up from her afternoon nap and her grandmother and I were sitting with her on the bed when she asked, "Why is there an old lady sitting on the chair watching me sleep?" The chair was in one of the corners of the room, facing the bed on the left. Her grandmother looked very surprised and just removed the chair and placed it in the dining room instead. She says nobody ever had unusual experiences in the house. My daughter forgot, but, like my mother before me, I didn't. The girl's father and I split up in 2009. 2 years ago, I lost most of my child support and I was having financial problems while trying to complete a graduate degree. The grandparents offered that the girls and I move into the farmhouse, which wasn't too far from the city and the university. I was reluctant at first because they are very difficult people. It seems like this would be a very kind thing to do, and maybe it is, but if you knew them, you would understand how they think and how they just really want to control me and the girls. I don't wish to go into this too much here, but they aren't very pleasant people to be around, to say the least. They have money and use it to bully people. In spite of this, I did accept their offer at the end because they own 2 properties in Florida, and I thought that, since they barely ever went to that house, I wouldn't have to put up with them too often. The girls were familiar with the place and the house is well kept, large and comfortable. I naturally had to use their son's old room since he was estranged from them, and the other rooms were occasionally used by them or their daughter. My children naturally moved into the room that was already theirs with bunk beds and all. Since my bedroom was the one where my daughter had seen a ghost as a toddler, I always slept with the lights on. I also did multiple sage burning cleansing all over the house, where I asked for only positive energy to remain and to please not be sacred by spirits, and we lived there happily for over a year. By then, the grandparents and aunts started to show up every other month and to treat us like their maids. Things were escalating. Our life turned into a modern Cinderella story. I had to drive to the airport to pick them up, I had to cook for them, and clean after them. They were verbally abusive to me and the children. Asked the girls to do things that were too hard for them physically. I knew that I needed to move out as soon as school ended, but I didn't want to uproot the children in the middle of the year. In November 2014, the grandmother tells me over the phone that they intend to spend an entire month at the farm at Christmas, instead of the usual 5-6 days. This was more than I could bear. I don't want to sound ungrateful, but I had a very bad feeling about this. I rationalized things and took the decisions that I just had to get through it since it was their house. That's when I started hearing a voice waking me up at 5:55 in the morning. It was very soft but clear. It sounded like hey, and it was coming from a feminine voice right over my face. You see, not only do I not hear voices, but I have a perfect internal clock and wake up every morning naturally at 7 a.m. without the help of an alarm clock. This was so strange. I ignored it the first time, but it happened again, and again. On the third morning that this happened, I became a little worried and told my mother about it over the phone. I am a pretty open-minded person, but numerology never seemed very credible to me. However, that seemed like the only way to try to understand this, so I searched online about the meaning of 555. The first thing I found was that it meant that something unexpected was about to happen. Then, as I was just looking around on the internet, I saw that in some Asian culture it means get out now. After I saw that online, I continued waking up to the voice at 5:55, but only one day out of 2 or 3. I was really trying to ignore it. But I felt really worried when I started hearing the voice at night as I was drifting asleep too. At some point, my children only had 1 day left of school before the holidays, and my mother convinced me to pack and come for a visit. I wrote an email to the grandparents and told them I needed to spend some time with my mother and would return on December 23rd to celebrate Christmas with them. This still gave us over 2 weeks together and assumed they'd like to have their house back and see their Canadian friends. I was very polite. Well, as I was on the road, halfway to my mother's, I received the nastiest violent emails from all of them. They insulted me in every possible way and told me they had talked about it already and had all agreed, the grandmother, the grandfather and the sister, to throw us out already, and that I was never to return to the house. Just because I decided to go visit my mother instead of waiting on them? I honestly tried to make peace and begged them to consider the well-being of their grandchildren who were in the middle of a school year and had friends, but it seemed to only fuel their violence toward me, so I stopped and they never came back on their decision or apologized for it. They shipped our belongings to my mother's house a week later through a moving company. I think that it is possible that my ability to hear ghosts as a child came back when I was in a different haunted farmhouse. While being thrown out on the streets a week before Christmas with my children was very unpleasant, I can't help thinking that I was probably better off at my mother's and that it's possible that someone was trying to warn us that we were about to be treated poorly, especially since the grandparents admitted having already decided to throw us out. If this Ontario farmhouse is haunted, I truly feel sorry for the ghosts, especially during the summer and at Christmas. I was up late working on my computer. I'm a 39-year-old male and I have always thought I saw shadow figures out of my peripheral vision, but I always assumed it was my eyes playing tricks on me. Until a couple of months ago. I moved into a new home about 2 years ago. The shadow figures were quite active in my peripheral, especially in my kitchen, as a matter of fact, only in my kitchen and never at night. I never realized that until now. Anyway, I still assumed it was just peripheral until I was up late about 2 a.m. getting some work done on my computer. 45 minutes or so had gone by. I wasn't sleepy or tired, nor did my eyes burn from the computer screen. I saw her out the corner of my eye sitting on my printer swinging her feet. She had on a hooded cloak. I didn't immediately turn thinking she would disappear because I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I couldn't see any definition or glowing eyes or anything, just a silhouette of a little girl or woman or whatever it was, but I'm sure it was female. Before turning to look at her, while her feet were swinging next to me. "Oh yes, my printer is about a foot away from my computer," I said. "I see you." She didn't move or stop swinging her feet until I looked directly at her. I looked directly at her hood where her face would be. She stopped swinging her feet but did not disappear promptly. She stayed visual for about 8 seconds and we were just looking at each other. I started to get upset because I'm a very private person. I immediately got up and turned on the light. She was already gone though, so I thought. I was extremely upset. It took me about 15 minutes, 2 cold glasses of water and a sit down on my bed. So I started back working on my computer with the light on now. About 10 minutes in, the feet were swinging again out of my peripheral. I said, "What do you want?" not looking at her this time because now I'm freaked out. As I said that, another hooded cloaked figure was moving on my right side. I immediately turned to look at it and it was directly on my shoulder like it was either reading what I was typing up or staring at me. I want to say I could feel it breathing on my shoulder like a temperature change, but I'm not 100% sure about that because they both disappeared when I looked at it. They were playing with me that night because I immediately saved my work, turned my computer off, left the light on and turned on the TV and watched a comedy to laugh and change my mood. How I figure they were playing because about an hour later when I got up to go and get a snack in the same area where the second figure was on my shoulder. It was running next to me outside of my room. I haven't seen them again, but I never felt threatened or in harm's way while they were there. It felt like they were either amused by me, wanted to really know if I could see them, or maybe studying me. I have no clue, but it still freaks me out until this day. I also stopped seeing the quick shadowy swooshes behind me in my peripheral in the kitchen after that night. Maybe they were saying goodbye or something. I really want to know what in the world or out of this world these entities are and what do they want. They're always maybe about 3 feet or so tall, about the height of an average 7-year-old. If anybody reads this and can give me any information or theory on the specifics of this situation, please leave a comment. Thanks. I have a lot of ghost experiences, but I chose this story for my first entry because it's the one that leaves me curious and scared the most. I welcome suggestions and questions since I'm not a very good storyteller and I'm not very good at describing either. And also, I apologize for the very long post. I suppose it started one summer afternoon in 2016. I was sitting in the living room watching TV when I felt like I'm being watched. I looked to my right where the window was, and I saw a black shadow in the shape of a man looking at me. It didn't have any features, but I just know it was looking at me. I can clearly see the shape of its head, shoulders and torso. I stared at it for about 2 seconds in disbelief before it glided sideways. Not too far from the window, on the same wall, was a glass door leading to the backyard. I was waiting for it to reappear on the glass door since it's in the same direction where the shadow was heading, but I didn't see it pass by. After a while of no show, I decided to go to the backyard to investigate the possible causes of the shadow, but it was a clear sunny sky. We didn't have trees or plants to cast a shadow like that. I stood on the exact area where it was standing and looked into the house on the same window, when I realized that the backyard ground is mid-thigh lower than the living room floor. Which means that only the shoulders and head of an average-sized person should be seen from the inside of the house. About 3 months later, while I'm sleeping, I woke up to this feeling where my body couldn't move. I felt heavy and extremely weak. I had sleep paralysis before, and it always freaked me out, so I managed to gather enough strength to open my eyes and look around to prove to myself that there's nothing there. I didn't see anything unusual, so I tried to pacify myself and go back to sleep. Not much later, I felt my blanket being carefully pulled down. I didn't pay attention to it as I'm feeling very sleepy, and I just tucked the end of the blanket under my feet hoping that whatever it is would stop. Just when I'm about to fall back to sleep, I felt I'm being pulled towards the foot of my bed. My closet is located at the foot of my bed. I didn't feel any hand that gripped my leg, but I just felt the sensation of being pulled. I got annoyed, so I opened my eyes to see what was going on, and I saw my closet door wide open. I usually leave it closed, and I saw three gangly humanoid black things. They're not exactly a shadow, more like slightly taller, bigger versions of Smeagol from Lost except they're solid black in color. I didn't see any facial features but they seemed to be startled that I woke up. I think they're trying to move me while I'm asleep. Somehow, I didn't feel scared. I have nothing but WTF in my mind. For what seemed like an eternity we just stared at each other and see what the other would do next. I can see one of them at the foot of my bed. I'm assuming he's the one pulling me, one inside the closet, which for some reason is completely empty of my things, and the other in the corner of the closet. There's a light at the bottom corner of the closet and I'm under the impression that it is an entrance somewhere that goes down. They didn't feel like negative beings but I still don't want them to bring me anywhere. So with all my might, I stood up to grab my Bible and they hurriedly ran inside the closet and shut the door. Didn't hear or see them in a while. Side note, my bedroom window looks over to the backyard. Half a year later, after showering I closed my closet doors so that I could hang my towel on the knobs to dry, then I got dressed and went to sleep. I dreamt that night that a woman was inviting me to do some activity, go with her somewhere. I can't remember which it is but somehow I had a gut feeling that I shouldn't accept her invitation. I politely declined and expressed that I shouldn't go, do something without knowing what it is. After declining her and my dream, I woke up to find a woman with bushy hair and long dress standing beside my bed just by my head. She was just pure black, darker than my unlit room, like the three Smeagols I saw. Once again, my body is unable to move. Upon realizing that I was awake looking at her, she said, "Well, that's why you have to come with me." And she motioned her hand to point to the closet. My closet door, on her signal, opened slightly. I didn't wait for it to completely open. I just started praying in my head, closed my eyes until I fell asleep. After reviewing these events over and over, it seemed to me that the three Smeagols were asked to take me but failed, so this woman tried the second time with a different tactic. Questions running in my head are, why me? What's inside the closet? If I went down where the light was, what's there? What are they? Thank you for reading my story. Any information is appreciated. To start with, I would like everyone to know that I'm the type of person who would look for rational explanations on everything. Not that I'm a skeptic or anything, but as someone who has 2 degrees under his belt, not bragging. Just making a point. I believe finding answers as to why things happen the way they do is all part of being rational and scientific. If I were skeptical, I wouldn't be on this site sharing my stories, would I? I work somewhere in the Middle East. Currently, the kingdom where I am in is in the depths of a recession. We don't have much projects as of now, so we are left with little to do. Boredom strikes me often and fortunately, I chanced upon this site while searching for some things related to horror stories. Being a fan of horror myself, I find it entertaining to read stories of such. What I find peculiar, and even funny, is that some stories here do not differ much from the things I experienced myself. Having read tales from different people in the past weeks made me decide to share my own experiences, starting with this incident from my childhood. I can't quite remember when did this happen exactly. If my memory serves me right, I think this happened sometime in the late 90s. My siblings and I grew up in a town in the province of Nueva Vizcaya, the Philippines. It isn't like most towns in the Philippines because it is urbanized to some extent. We have huge establishments back in my hometown, but that doesn't change the fact that the province is still largely rural. Having said that, stories of superstitions and the like are still unquestionably existing. Gadgets weren't as prolific as they are now, so we had to rely on outdoor activities during daytime and watch TV at night to keep ourselves entertained. Meaning, our television back then was abused to the point that the remote control gave up on us. This particular night was nothing out of the ordinary, or so we thought. I was watching television with 3 of my 5 siblings around 9 in the evening when we decided to switch channels. Our television back then was a Sony Trinitron. Not the flat screen type, but the one with a huge box behind the screen. Lol. Since the remote control wasn't working, we had to use the button on the TV to change channels or control the volume. Being the kids that we were, we kept on switching channels and arguing what show to watch. Until the buttons gave up on us as well. They had sunken in. Afraid that our mom would find out and get mad at us, we decided to fix it ourselves. We unplugged the TV, fearful that we might get an electric shock while trying to fix the buttons. Then removed it from the stand, and placed it on the floor. The four of us were seated on the floor surrounding the huge lump of old technology. Just as we finished laughing at a certain joke one of us cracked up, I suddenly heard someone giggle. Ai-hee-hee-hee. It was the tiniest, highest-pitched, is this even a term? Voice I have ever heard. I thought I was just hearing things when my younger sister said Mai Nakatawa. Someone laughed with us. To which I answered Owen Gatnarinigko. Yes, I heard it. Our younger brother then said Din. Me too. As for my other younger sister, I can't remember if she heard it too. We weren't really frightened by what happened. I don't know why. Maybe because we were too young back then, or maybe because we didn't feel anything negative about who or what laughed with us that night. What I am sure of, is that it didn't come from the television because it was unplugged. It wasn't from anyone in the house because we were the only ones awake that time. And it certainly wasn't from one of my siblings because the sound was right in the middle of our huddle. And it was, well, different. It was non-human. I have a lot of creepy stories growing up. And I'm hoping to have them shared soon. Every day now, I feel like I'm being constantly watched. I'm not sure why, and maybe it's just my cat. But, sometimes when I'm alone, I feel a light finger stroke my foot. If I'm standing up, it happens somewhere on my rib cage. It's kind of creepy that this happens, because I have heard a voice a few times. It usually says something like hey there, or hi. I believe spirits are just dead people or animals that choose to stay on Earth. But why would a ghost be in my room if I live in a house with no previous deaths? I'm stuck having to deal with a playful ghost tickling me at least once a day when I'm on my computer. I'm guessing the spirit is about a preteen and male. I can only hear the voice a little bit, so maybe the ghost is female. I don't know. The ghost is apparently harmless, and whenever I feel a tickling sensation, I can easily pull away. I'm not completely sure what is going on, but I know it's probably just a child who died and wants to be him, herself. I'm personally young, too, so maybe I'm wrong. The thing that concerns me is that I want to know more about this ghost, if it even is a ghost, and what does he or she want from me. I'm not sure, but I need answers. I keep getting sensations on occasions, and I must know why, so I can help this spirit if he or she needs something. Please comment if you have experienced this, and I need some advice for knowing what the heck is going on, because the poking and the tickling is getting mildly annoying. I'm sure it's not something bad, but I need answers. I have enough material to entertain any campfire audience throughout the night. When it comes to ghost stories, my trunk is full of them. And when I'm into story 4 or 5, I myself start to believe I'm full of shit, but believe me, these stories are real. This one is about the time I came face to face with a full apparition. I was working for a produce company in San Francisco, delivering organic fruit and vegetables to the well-off residing in the Bay Area. Part of my route was in Mill Valley, which is located on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge. If you can imagine a bunch of rich hippie types living in the woods, you can get the gist in what this place resembles. Anyway, it was my first week on the job, so the driver that was leaving was riding shotgun, while directing me throughout the day. We pulled up to this house, which had a ridiculously long driveway. So there I was, humping this box of apples and whatnot to this monster house, and when I entered the front yard, the heebie-jeebies started to run up the back of my neck. I walked up to the front door with my head on a swivel and knocked on the door. No answer. I shrugged, put the box on the doormat, and turned around to a very old, very white, old man in, very white, pajamas. He resembled Santa that was dipped in a vat of bleach. He just stood there with this dead stare. It was like he was looking through me without blinking, nor moving. And now that I think about it, I probably had the same expression. So, After 5 seconds or so, I just scurried around him while mumbling an awkward, excuse me. I bolted for the truck, and when I jumped inside, my ride-along looked up from his book and asked how everything went. I just started up the truck, blurted out, "I think I just seen a ghost, dude," and kicked up dust. 2 weeks later, I had another delivery at that house, but this time an older lady answered the door. I asked her if her husband was a heavier-set man with a beard. She answered yes, but how did I know? So I told her about our encounter, and of course she replied back to me that that was impossible because he had died 2 years prior. I'm just newly registered 'cause I love reading real experiences of the paranormal. Although for me, paranormal is not the correct word. Because we and everything we do, say, everything that surrounds us, is made of energy. And energy, the good and the bad one, never gets lost. It simply transforms itself. Like Einstein said, nothing was ever created and nothing gets ever lost. It is simply always there. And that's why I never doubt if anyone's telling stories about ghosts, demons, spirituality etc. because it is a part of us. If the energy expresses itself as harmful or dangerous, it's difficult to deal with. Well, now I want to tell you one of my stories. This happened 10 years ago and I was working as a nurse in a hospital for old, helpless people. Most of them were constantly lying in bed, slowly dying, in a sort of a coma. I was on the night shift with a very dear female member of my team. We loved to work together. Imagine that we were the only 2 healthy persons in a house filled with 120 patients. Of course, half of them were able to look after themselves and completely independent. On our main checkup and take care tour that took place from 3.00 to 5.30 we had 2 wards left, changing pampers, give medication, made people drink. So we entered the second ward and I heard a strange kind of noise. Very loud and clear, with some disturbances, like a radio, but I couldn't understand what the person was saying. It was a female voice. I told my friend to listen and she said, "Strange, seems like someone has put on TV or the radio." I answered, "Stephanie, how is a paralyzed person doing to put on a radio or TV? Anyway, this seems like a person talking next to us, not from inside a room which door is closed." She looked at me, "You're right. But let's continue." We were listening, but the voice suddenly stopped. And so I thought, maybe I'm just tired. We went to our next patient and had to change the entire sheets, wash the man and put a fresh pajama on him because he and the whole bed were full of liquid excrement. So this took us a lot of time and we were running from the bed to the bathroom and so on. Finally, Stephanie told me that she would put a new shirt on the man, so I started to carry all the dirty stuff outside in the hall, where our caddy was placed. Because of our need in sheets, blankets, skin products, towels etc., the door of the room was open to have free access to the caddy. So I turned my back to my friend, and I heard her talking with the man, moving him etc. A sheet fell down on the floor while I was walking, so I had to go down to grab it from the floor. And the moment I took the blanket I looked through the open door into the hall. And I swear, a little old person in a white nightgown passed through the hall. It didn't touch the floor, it was like floating, completely silent. First, I thought, what the F? Stephanie was just now at Mr. D's bed. What is she doing in the hall? Remember that as nurses, we were dressed in white. The logic question that, if Stephanie would have left Mr. X, I would have seen her leaving the room, didn't come to my mind. I simply stood there like frozen. All this happened in seconds. I heard Stephanie's voice behind me, "Hey, what's going on? You want to carry that dirty sheets all night?" She laughed. I jumped and said, "Steph. But you were just outside in the hall?" "No, I was dressing and installing Mr. X. Remember? What's wrong? Your face is as pale as snow. You feel unwell? You need to throw up?" I put everything I had in my arms on the floor and ran into the hall. I still saw the apparition of the woman before she vanished through the wall. Steph came after me as I was standing there with goosebumps all over my body and trembling from terror and cold. We were in the midst of the summer, but I swear in the hall it was as cold as in a refrigerator. Steph said, "Wow. Why is it suddenly so cold?" She hadn't seen the woman. And I told her, "Don't ask me why I said this, we have to go downstairs. Mrs. Z has just died." Incredibly, she looked at me. "What? How will you know?" "We just looked after her, she was sleeping." "Steph, I swear, she is dead. I've seen her ghost passing through the hall." Confused, my friend followed me downstairs, and when we entered Mrs. Z's room, it was a peaceful and warm atmosphere inside. In fact, she died a few moments ago. Her body was still warm. So we called the med to have the attestation, and at the end of the shift, we washed and dressed her in a beautiful gown. I was silent all the time. But Steph couldn't believe it. She was talking, asking me questions. At home, after work, I fell in my bed. I was not afraid anymore or scared, simply surprised. I slept a few hours and dreamed of Mrs. Z. She came towards me, was much younger than I have ever seen her, healthy and surrounded by a sort of white light. She told me, "Thank you, dear, for looking after me all these years. I'm leaving now." Much later, when I occupied my mind with events like this, I realized that the radio he heard at the beginning was an EVP of Mrs. Z. Hope you enjoy the story. This experience is dedicated to McNorton. The following is taken from my journal. September 1, 2012. I was just standing at the sink, literally, getting ready to run water in the sink. I heard a little girl say what I thought to be Pink. I turned and said, "I heard you. I heard what you just said." Then I started wondering if I really heard Pink or if it was some variation of Ink, or maybe even Ing, because I couldn't figure out why Pink. Y'all have to understand, I have had a migraine going on almost 24 hours, so I'm a little slow on understanding and comprehending. Then it hit me. Two things. I have a pitcher of Kool-Aid, generic LOL, sitting on the kitchen sink that I had just emptied, very small amount left in it. It is pink, and the dawn is also pink LOL. So I pointed these things out, acknowledging that I realized she had said pink and that both these things are pink and that Dalton had made the pink Kool-Aid. Very cool experience because I haven't audibly heard her in a long time. I also realized the tank top I had on was pink striped. Sharing this experience in no way is meant to be offensive or imply that I know more than anyone else. It is simply something I wanted to share because it offers a different perspective. There could be numerous reasons for material objects appearing as shadowy things, as Mac referenced. I can only share what I have experienced. It doesn't mean I think I know better, because I don't. Maybe it is like someone being colored blind. Who knows? Maybe there are deficiencies like these once we pass, although I don't think I've come across anything to back that up. And while trying to fill the character requirement, here is other crackpot theory. Maybe seeing in color versus shadows depends upon how long someone has been a ghost, spirit. Just food for thought.